This ancient story begins by showing the time when the Turkish Empire was attacking Romania. A major war was going on between the two empires as they tried to conquer each other's territory. The Turkish forces were vast and powerful, capable of destroying any empire in a single strike. However, there was a king in Romania named Dracula who wanted to protect his kingdom. Dracula, along with his allies, decided to directly confront the Turkish army and destroy them. Dracula had a very beautiful wife named Elizabeth. He loved her deeply, and after saying goodbye to her, he left for the war. Elizabeth was extremely worried because anything could happen in a war. Dracula and his armies were fiercely attacking the Turkish forces, and many Turkish soldiers were badly injured. In retaliation, the Turkish soldiers devised a deceitful plan. They sent a letter to Elizabeth falsely stating that Dracula had died in the war. After hearing this, Elizabeth was devastated. She loved her husband deeply and, overwhelmed by grief and fear, took her own life by jumping to her death. When Dracula returned to the castle after the war and found his wife's dead body, he was heartbroken and began to cry. In anguish, Dracula blamed God and the divine powers, saying it was their fault. After all, he had fought to protect his religion, so what was Elizabeth's fault? At that time, it was believed that those who committed suicide would go to hell. Dracula lost all faith in God and refused to worship him ever again. In his rage, he struck a statue of God with his sword. Shockingly, blood began to flow from the statue. Dracula approached, filled a cup with the blood, and drank it, symbolizing his decision to completely reject God and do everything possible to defy him. Many years passed after this moment. Now, the story shifts to a man named Renfield who is shown inside a prison, acting like a madman, eating bugs and living in misery. Renfield was once a property dealer who had recently returned from Romania. However, Jack, the man Renfield worked for, had now hired another property dealer named Jonathan. Jack had provided Jonathan with many details about a client who lived in Romania. This client was none other than Dracula himself, who wanted to buy several properties. That's why Jack was assigning Jonathan this job. It was a big consignment for them. Jonathan found everything quite normal, so he accepted the offer. Before leaving, Jonathan went to meet his fiancée, Mina. The two were planning to get married soon, so Jonathan promised her that after completing this assignment, they would get married. But at that moment, Mina didn't want Jonathan to leave her. Still, Jonathan had to work. That's where all the money would come from. Jonathan set out for Romania with all the property papers. After traveling for a few hours, he reached the forests of Romania. Along the way, a girl gave him a strange-looking locket. Before he could ask what it was, the people disappeared. Dracula had already sent his carriage to pick Jonathan up. Jonathan got inside, and the carriage began moving forward. As it continued through the forest, Jonathan noticed many wolves around and strange flames flickering in the distance, something that doesn't happen in a normal forest, which made it all feel very eerie. But Jonathan wasn't concerned with these things, so he continued straight to Dracula's castle. Once inside, he called out, and Dracula appeared right in front of him. Dracula now looked quite old. He had Jonathan sit down and offered him breakfast. This was the same Dracula who, many years ago, had been a king and was cursed after the death of his wife. Now Dracula survived by killing humans and drinking their blood. As Dracula looked through Jonathan's wallet and saw a photo of Mina, he was immediately shocked, because Mina looked exactly like his deceased wife, Elizabeth. Dracula thought perhaps Mina was the reincarnation of his beloved wife. So, Dracula told Jonathan directly to write a letter to his fiancée, saying that he would be staying there for many more days. Dracula wanted Jonathan out of the way as soon as possible. He didn't want Mina to be left alone. But here, Dracula began to show his true nature, frightening Jonathan. Jonathan feared that Dracula might even kill him. Not wanting to lose such a big client, Jonathan agreed and wrote the letter to Mina just as Dracula instructed. Jonathan had no idea what a huge mistake he had made. On the other side, Mina was feeling very lonely in Jonathan's absence, so she went to stay for a few days with her friend Lucy, who belonged to a wealthy family. Lucy was a playful, free-spirited girl who used to enjoy herself with every guest who came to her house. Mina was quite shocked by Lucy's behavior, as being around so many different people at once was not something she was used to. But Lucy had a genuinely kind heart, which is why Mina decided to stay with her. Meanwhile, Jonathan was still living in Dracula's castle. One day, while shaving, he accidentally cut himself with the razor, and a bit of blood started to come out. Dracula sensed the blood instantly and was drawn directly toward Jonathan. Seeing Dracula standing in front of him, Jonathan was terrified. As soon as Jonathan got distracted, Dracula took the razor and started licking the blood off it. He was clearly tempted at that moment. He even came very close to Jonathan and tried to bite him, which left Jonathan stunned. Now Jonathan realized that something was seriously wrong with the place. Dracula's behavior was far too strange, and Jonathan decided he would leave the next day. But the most shocking thing happened when Jonathan saw Dracula climbing up the walls of his room like some kind of creature. That made it crystal clear to Jonathan: Dracula wasn't a normal human, he was a demon. And now he also discovered that Dracula had been alive for thousands of years. While exploring the castle further, Jonathan entered a chamber and, seeing a bed there, decided to rest for a while. What he didn't know was that Dracula's 3 wives were also in that castle, and they were vampires too. The 3 women immediately came to him and tried to bite him and drink his blood. But just in time, Dracula arrived and commanded his wives to leave, declaring that only he would consume Jonathan's blood. To satisfy them, Dracula offered them another man, whom they started to kill viciously. Jonathan, no matter how much he wanted to escape, couldn't leave the castle. Dracula wouldn't allow it. Jonathan soon noticed that Dracula was having a large amount of soil packed by his servants. The soil was being placed into boxes that were going to be transported on a ship. This was no ordinary soil, it was from Transylvania. Dracula could only survive in Transylvanian soil, all his powers were connected to it. If Dracula went somewhere without it, his powers would weaken drastically, and he could even die. That's why Dracula was now preparing to travel to London, where he had purchased many properties. Dracula, along with his men, boarded the ship and began his journey toward London. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Jonathan was being watched closely by Dracula's 3 wives, who had been left behind to keep him from escaping. Once Dracula reached London, the very first thing he did was transform into his true youthful form and set out to find Mina, still believing she was the reincarnation of his beloved wife. He arrived outside the mansion where Mina was staying with her friend Lucy. Using his powers, Dracula hypnotized Lucy and summoned her to him. Completely entranced, Lucy walked right up to Dracula, who then bit her. Hearing Lucy's screams, Mina rushed to the scene. But by the time she arrived, Dracula had vanished. Mina brought her friend back into the mansion, but Lucy already appeared to be in a deteriorating state. Doctors were immediately called in to treat her. Since Dracula had fed on Lucy's blood, his powers had grown stronger, and he regained his youthful appearance, just as he had been many years ago. Now, dressed in stylish clothes, Dracula began roaming the city. Soon, he encountered Mina again. He always saw Mina as his wife, so he walked right up to her and introduced himself, saying, "I'm new in this city and don't know anyone here. Could you help me explore it?" Mina agreed and took Dracula to a cinema theater, where people were watching a film. At one moment, Dracula had the opportunity to drink Mina's blood, but he chose not to. Because in his heart, he believed she was his wife reborn. And if that was true, he didn't want to harm her. In fact, he hoped that one day, her memories of their past life together might return. So, Dracula kept her pure and unharmed. Back at the mansion, Lucy's condition was getting worse. Despite all efforts by the doctors, nothing was helping. Eventually, Dr. Jack was also called in, but even he couldn't understand what was going on. So Lucy's fiancé, Arthur, was brought in. Arthur, deeply concerned, told his guards that no matter what it took, no matter the cost, Lucy had to be cured. That's when Dr. Jack decided to call upon a renowned scientist and expert he knew, Dr. Van Helsing. When Helsing arrived and saw Lucy's condition, he was extremely shocked. As he began a more detailed investigation, he noticed 2 bite marks on Lucy's neck. From this, Helsing realized that this was the work of a demon. Lucy's condition had already worsened, so Helsing took Arthur and Jack outside and explained everything, that she had been bitten by a demon, meaning a vampire. However, Arthur didn't believe in these things. He said there must be some kind of poison in Lucy's body that had paralyzed her. But Helsing was fully convinced that it was the work of a vampire. He said that if good things exist in the world, then bad ones do too. As long as this demon, the vampire, is alive, Lucy cannot be cured. She will always remain under the vampire's control and will act according to his will. When Arthur and Jack came back to see Lucy, they noticed her teeth had become strangely vampire-like. She wanted to drink the blood of everyone around her, but she was tied to the bed. Helsing couldn't bear to see poor Lucy in that condition, so he opened a book to find some solutions. He started reading books written specifically about Dracula, in which everything about him was documented. While reading, Helsing discovered how many years ago Dracula had cursed himself while fighting his enemies, after the death of his wife, and how he stood against God. Dracula had no control over it, it was his destiny. Helsing now knew everything, and it became completely clear that no one else, but Dracula himself, had bitten Lucy. Meanwhile, Dracula started meeting Mina more often, and Mina too, began to like Dracula. He even took her to his home to have breakfast together. Mina really enjoyed his company. At one point, Mina told Dracula that she had been having strange dreams about a woman who jumped into a river and ended her life for her husband. From this, Dracula immediately realized that these might be the memories of his wife, which Mina was somehow experiencing. Instead of denying it, he encouraged her, asking how she felt connected to that woman. Slowly, Mina began to realize that she was Dracula's wife, that she had died many years ago, but had now been reincarnated, and eventually, she would be with Dracula once again. On the other hand, we are shown Jonathan, who is escaping from Dracula's 3 wives. He jumps out of the castle and lands in a river, then travels far away. Inside a church, Jonathan hurriedly writes a letter for his wife Mina because her life might be in danger. When Mina receives the letter shortly after, it clearly says that she should come to Romania so that the two of them can get married there, as they are being hunted by very dangerous people. Mina understands everything and wants to return to Jonathan, but she has already formed an emotional attachment to Dracula. So, she also writes a letter to Dracula, telling him that she is going to her fiancé Jonathan and will marry him. When Dracula receives this letter, he becomes extremely angry with both Jonathan and Mina. Driven mad by Mina's decision to leave, Dracula, in his true monstrous form, attacks Lucy in a fit of rage. Lucy is severely attacked during this moment, and while it appears she has died, in reality, she hasn't. Instead, Dracula's bite has transformed her into a vampire. Her family and everyone else believe she has died, and a funeral is held. But Helsing and Jack aren't convinced. After Lucy is buried, Helsing and his team visit her grave. When they open it, they find that Lucy's body is missing. Shortly after, Lucy emerges from the shadows, carrying a child from whom she has been consuming blood to stay alive. Lucy has now fully transformed into a vampire. When Helsing and his companions confront her, Lucy tries to attack them too. But Helsing uses a cross to scare her off. When she retreats into her grave, Helsing knows exactly how to kill a vampire. He follows the proper ritual, ends Lucy's existence, and seals her grave. Now, everyone realizes that vampires and Dracula are indeed real. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Mina get married and vow to stay together forever. But when they return to London, Helsing meets Jonathan and explains everything to him. Mina is deeply saddened by Lucy's death. That's when Helsing tells them that as long as Dracula is alive, Mina's life will remain in danger. Dracula must be destroyed. Jonathan mentions that he might know where Dracula is hiding, because, under Dracula's instructions, he had purchased several properties in London. Now, Helsing decides that he must find and face Dracula. So now, Jonathan and several others head toward that location. At that moment, Dracula wasn't present there, but Jonathan had already burned all the boxes filled with soil. That soil was the source of Dracula's power. They decided to stay at the place for a while, and Mina went to sleep in one of the rooms. Not long after, Dracula entered. Mina was happy to see him and hugged him. This was because the memories from her past life as Dracula's wife were resurfacing. In that past life, she had deeply loved Dracula. Dracula also reassures Mina that soon they will be together forever. But then Mina starts pleading with him, saying, "Please bite me and make me like you." Dracula initially refuses, as he considers it a curse. Becoming a vampire means losing all the things that make you human. But Mina insists again and again, resisting Dracula's refusal. Finally, he bites her on the neck, meaning that very soon, she would become like him. At that moment, Jonathan, Helsing, and Jack arrive and catch Dracula with Mina. Dracula, in his true form, tries to attack them. But Helsing presents the cross in front of him. Everyone thinks Dracula would be afraid of it, but his powers are so immense that he burns the cross itself. Dracula simply says, "I've prayed to this god for centuries, but now even God can't stop me from reclaiming my wife." Jonathan rushes to Mina and comforts her, then pulls out a gun and shoots Dracula. Though wounded, Dracula transforms into a swarm of rats and escapes. He has become very weak now, and because his powers have diminished, he reverts to his old form. He is then placed inside one of those soil-filled boxes by his followers, who begin transporting him back to his castle, where he would regain full strength. After reaching a safe place, Helsing questions Mina and tries to hypnotize her. He knew that since Dracula had bitten her, Mina was now spiritually connected to him. Using this link to their advantage, Helsing hypnotizes Mina to discover Dracula's exact location. They realize that Dracula is returning to Transylvania to regain his full strength. This presents the perfect opportunity to attack and destroy him once and for all. Jonathan, Jack, Helsing, and several others set out with Mina toward Transylvania, determined to stop Dracula. This time, Jonathan swears he will not let Dracula live. Helsing and Jonathan had come up with a foolproof plan. They would kill Dracula before he could reach his castle, because once inside, Dracula's powers would automatically be restored. After discussing among themselves, Helsing decided that Jonathan and his team would go ahead and try to kill Dracula on the way, while Helsing would take Mina directly to the castle. Everyone began working according to the plan they were assigned. As Helsing was traveling with Mina, she suddenly became uncontrollable, because she had already become a vampire. She secretly tried to attack Helsing and drink his blood. But Helsing was aware this might happen, so he placed a silver coin on Mina's forehead, which brought her back to her senses. Helsing then took Mina safely to Dracula's castle. Once there, he kept moving forward, and the first thing he did was kill Dracula's 3 vampire wives. He performed the proper rituals and disposed of their bodies. Suddenly, Mina began to feel that Dracula was very close, since they were now spiritually connected. Dracula also sensed this clearly. But just as he was about to reach his castle, Jonathan and his companions arrived and started attacking Dracula's men. Dracula realized that his soldiers were being killed and that he couldn't go outside yet, as it wasn't nighttime. Jonathan and his team had excellent aim, and eventually only Dracula remained. Meanwhile, Mina was behaving strangely, most likely due to her deepening connection with Dracula. She began summoning her powers, causing dark clouds to gather in the sky. Dracula becomes strongest at night, so as soon as darkness falls, he escapes from the box and begins attacking Jonathan's companions. Dracula's dark energy was so powerful that no soldier could withstand it. But even with all that, Dracula was much weaker than before. Taking advantage of the moment, one of Jonathan's allies stabbed him with a sword, forcing Dracula to stop in his tracks. Seizing the opportunity, everyone attacked Dracula together. He became so weak that he couldn't even fight back. As Jonathan moved in to finish Dracula once and for all, Mina suddenly appeared. Pointing a gun at everyone, she told them not to kill Dracula, because he was her husband and must be kept alive. Helsing told his team to step back, realizing that Mina was still under Dracula's influence and speaking from the memories of her past life. Once everyone moved aside, Mina immediately took the injured Dracula into a church. It was the same church where, many years ago, Dracula had given up his life and had been cursed, turning into a vampire. A dangerous vampire, Dracula. Here, Dracula was actually thanking Mina, because now he would finally be free. He accepted that everything was his own fault. He had betrayed God, even though he had always stood by him. But due to one mistake, he went against the divine. So Dracula's end was meant to happen this way. Mina didn't want Dracula to leave her, so she hugged him and kissed him. As she did this, a strange energy wave spread all around. It felt as if God had forgiven Dracula. Dracula then pleaded with Mina, asking her to set him free. Mina had understood that Dracula could no longer be saved. So, with a heavy heart, she took a sword and drove it through his body. After properly killing him, Dracula was finally set free. He happily ascended to heaven, at peace forever. With Dracula's death, Mina was also released from his influence. Now she could go back to Jonathan and begin a new life with him. And with that, our story comes to an end.